understand that college planning is a process, right? You don't sit down on one Sunday afternoon and say, all right, we're going to knock it out today. We're building our college plan. You're going to sit down on many Sunday afternoons and say, all right, this is where we are. What do we do next? Should we visit schools? Do we have to work on our testing? What about scholarships? And then you'll go do some things. And then based on what you do, you might come back and say, oh, well, we just visited those expensive privates. Our student didn't like them. All right, so now we have to reconfigure and say, well, let's look at some state schools.
Hello, Profit First entrepreneurs and thought leaders. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Brad Baldridge, and Brad is one of the nation's leading college financial experts. And what Brad does is he teaches families the best way to plan, save, and pay for college so they can make their children's college dreams come true without wiping out their finances or their retirement. And Brad has over 20 years of experience sharing his expertise and insights through his private practice and as a blogger and the host of Taming the High Cost of College podcast. He's been a presenter at numerous workshops and seminars. And today we're going to talk about how to plan for your child's college. And this is a big, important topic because a lot of our entrepreneurs that are implementing Profit First, you guys know, you are intentionally creating profitability, right? You are making your transfers twice a month. You're transferring to your profit account. You're transferring to your owner's pay account. You're transferring to your tax account. And some of you guys, you're putting away about 50% of your money into owner's benefit, right? So if you're $1 million company, you might be having an adjusted gross income. We want to talk tax for a minute, about $500,000. And as you guys know, there's something called the FAFSA, right? The FAFSA where they look at your income in order to determine your financial need. And for some of you guys, you might be phasing those opportunities out because of your income. So I'm really excited today to bring Brad on to talk about, how do we as high net worth people who are implementing Profit First really plan strategically so that our children can go to college and earn it. And I'll tell you my personal standpoint, I want my kids to make it in the world on their own, right? I want them to work hard, and I definitely don't want to get in their way of applying for scholarships. So please join me in welcoming Brad Baldridge to the platform. Hey, Brad, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great.
Well, this is an exciting topic for our entrepreneurs, like planning for college. And, I know we had a little discussion off air. We were talking about those late planners and those early planners. I think most of us entrepreneurs are probably on the late planner side. So we definitely want to talk about how do we catch up. But first of all, Brad, how did you get interested in this topic?
Yeah, so I've been a financial advisor since the 90s. And about 20 years ago, I started participating more in college planning with families because it was starting to get a little more expensive and becoming more important and a bigger line item on the budget for most families. And as I started delving into it, I realized that there's a lot of strategies that families can use and interesting ways that you can pay for college, et cetera. But most families weren't using them, and most people didn't understand them, including the general financial advisor community didn't really understand much about how to pay for college or how the whole system worked. So as I started spending more time talking about it, I got more questions. The more questions I got, the more I talked about it. Next thing you know, it became a specialty where I got much more involved, launched a podcast, Taming the High Cost of College, where I talk about planning and paying for college, and kind of took off from there. So that's, I guess, the short answer of how I got involved is I just kind of stumbled into it and did it more and more.
I love it. We're excited to have you here on our podcast to really help us navigate this area, which can be very costly and very expensive. I found myself a few months ago just kind of going on Harvard's website and just kind of playing with their tuition calculator. And it was like $80,000.
Yes.
Based upon where everything was, and I was thinking to myself, I don't want to shortcut this little one's dream, but $80,000 out of mommy's retirement is a lot of money. So let's talk about where to even begin, for us that are looking at that $80,000 calculator now and looking at like 2 or 3 years on the horizon. Tell us about where do we even begin with this planning?
Right. So, the first thing to understand, I think, probably is that, what does college actually cost? And then another really important concept is what is your net cost versus list price? So let's start with just the very basics of list price. So list price for the average state school is about $27,000, And list price for the average private school is about $57,000. Now, when we say list price, what does that mean? Well, that's tuition, room and board, books, fees, beer, and pizza. It's the whole cost for a typical student for 1 year. And then, as you mentioned, some of the most expensive schools, the Ivy League and Caltech and some of those types of schools, they're over $80,000 per year now. But that does include tuition, room and board, the whole cost. Just tuition is about $60,000 at a lot of these schools. So it is, relatively expensive, but that's just half the story. Now, a lot of these schools are also potentially very generous when it comes to aid, and they may provide need-based aid or merit aid. And the average aid at a public school is about $6,000 or $8,000, and the average aid at a private school is more like $20,000 or $25,000. And again, that's average. Your family is almost never average. It could be above average or below average. It's hard to know without kind of doing the work. But especially the most expensive colleges, a lot of them have large endowments and are very generous. Stanford put out a press release where if your income is below $150,000, then Stanford will be free. Zero tuition, zero room and board. And if it's under $100,000, if it's under $150,000, it'll be zero tuition, and you may have to pay some for room and board. But another interesting thing is at these very expensive schools, even if you're earning $300,000, $400,000, I've seen families qualify for need-based aid still at the very high incomes. Again, because the colleges are so expensive that even at high incomes, they're still daunting, especially if multiple kids at the same time and that kind of stuff going on. So I have seen it happen where relatively high income. Now, if you're multi-million in income, you're probably not much you can do about it at that point. But it goes a lot higher than many people assume. Again, because it varies by the school you're looking at and that type of thing as well. So I hear a lot of people say, well, my brother-in-law didn't get any aid at the local state school, so we're not going to get any aid. Well, that's only true if you're very similar to your brother-in-law and your student's very similar to your niece or nephew, because it's based on academics, it's based on financial situation. There's lots of reasons that you might qualify for aid. So you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. And most people are not. They're just kind of rumors that they hear at the water cooler at work or whatever it might be versus really delving into it. So, so that's where you start. For a lot of families, that private school that they say, oh, that's way too expensive. It lists at $65,000. But if you get a $30,000 scholarship, now all of a sudden private school at 35 or the state school at 28, let's say, now they're with close enough that many families would say, if there's value, if we see a reason to spend a little bit more, we're happy to do it. Now, again, most people are also, if it's the same, then maybe not. So for a lot of families, education is commoditized where they say, well, one college degree is just like the other. For many other families, it's very much brand name type of thing where they just are working really hard to get into the brand name. And I think both of those are right and both of those are wrong. I don't think that where you go to college is as critical as some people make it out to be. On the flip side, spending more isn't necessarily the wrong answer either. So finding that balance, I think, for a lot of families is important.
I love it. I love it. It's finding that balance, right? And, there's so many factors that go into success, exactly like you said, a lot of people are successful that didn't go to like major Ivy League schools and things like that. So just, depending on where you're at out there, it's not the worst thing in the world for your child to go to a state school or even starting out with a 2-year school and then later transferring, you do the best that you can. And really your child at the end of the day is responsible for their success.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's much more important that you find what's a good fit for your student and not worry so much about national averages or rankings or all the other stuff where it's generic, right? All that generic stuff is too generic to be useful, in my opinion. I think for a lot of cases, you need to find a school where your student's going to thrive. And it could be that expensive Ivy, but it could be the local state school, or it could be a gap year and then something else unusual. And then for many students, the right answer is college is the wrong answer. College is not what you should be doing. You should be looking at, 2-year apprenticeships, other ways that, and again, many of the entrepreneurs that are probably listening said, I learned at the School of Hard Knocks. That's how I learned. And I've had parents, very jaded and say, well, if, college is a complete waste of money. It's like, well, again, there are situations where it is. But for many career paths now, it's the only game in town. I mean, you're not going to become an elementary ed teacher, most likely, unless you go get the elementary ed degree, whether you like it or not. Same with nursing, same with engineering. There was a time when you could become an engineer by starting, low in the drafting department and working your way up, and they kind of grant you the title of engineer eventually. That doesn't happen very often anymore. Now you pretty much need the degree. So if that's where you're going. On the flip side, if you look at a graphic artist, graphic designer, a lot of them, those people are self-taught, and a lot of business owners say, show me what you can do. I like what you can do. You're hired. Nobody cares where you went to school or even if you went to school. It's, can you provide what I need? And if the answer is yes, you'll be hired. Musicians, graphic designers, many different in the arts and writers and all that kind of stuff. Again, if you can prove you can do it, a lot of times you don't need the official degree to make it happen. Whereas, again, in the healthcare fields, you have to have the degree or you're not going to get the license. Without the license, you're not going to get the job. Whether we like it or not, that's the way it is.
Oh, yeah. I approached college. My parents were like, make sure you get one of those degrees that you can get a job when you get out. Right.
Right.
So I was always looking at that ROI, like what's the ROI of just like your business, what's the ROI of me taking this next action? And you definitely want to make sure there's a game plan. So Brad, with that being said, for those of us that are facing college in the next few years and looking at that $30,000 to $60,000 or higher bill, where do we start with really starting to put away money to be successful? Or, or do you feel that's like the parent's responsibility is to put away money?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do feel it's the parent's responsibility. And I guess, and it's not really my opinion that matters. It really matters what the colleges think and the system, right? So, and the way the system is set up, if your student's younger than 24, the typical student that graduates from high school and goes on to college, they're going to be required to report mom and dad's finances. Again, unless there's very extenuating circumstances. If they're married, if they're part of a runaway program, if they have dependents of their own, there's exceptions. But the typical family is going to end up, mom and dad's going to report their income. The colleges are going to hold that against the student. So mom and dad can say, yes, I have high income, but I'm not willing to pay. That's not good enough for a college. The college is going to say, well, we're not going to pay either. So because you can afford to pay, we're going to have, there's going to be a parent piece to it. If the parent refuses, well, then the student probably isn't going to go. That's what's going to happen. So, or the student's going to have to raise, large amounts of money on their own. Now, if the parent's income is low, well, then a lot of times there's other aid available where it can kind of fit together. So again, a lot of parents say, well, it's unfair. And it's like, whether it is or it isn't, doesn't really matter. It's the way it is. So you're just going to have to deal with it. So I see that a lot where, again, parents are saying, well, why do you hold this against? Well, again, it's the way the system was set up. Whether that's right or wrong, you're not going to get around that system. Now, that being said, if now it's the parent's responsibility, a lot of times we can work the system a little bit, right? There's certainly need-based aid, right? And that's based on the income and the assets of mom and dad and the student. And again, I've seen families earning a few $100,000 still qualify for need-based aid. But even if you don't qualify for need-based aid, you're still going to have to pay for college. And now we move into all the other strategies and tactics that you could use. Things like merit aid. So there's a lot of colleges out there, for strong academics, they offer scholarships. For sports, they offer scholarships. For minorities or other reasons, they offer scholarships. So there's lots of reasons that a college could offer money off that's not tied to family income. That's one piece of it. And that helps bring down the net cost. So you start with a school that costs $75 and they win a good scholarship, say of $35. So now we're at a net of $40. Well, then the next thing is now you want to pay that $40 as efficiently as possible. So now we look at tax strategies and saving and investing and negotiating with the school and all the different things that we can do, payment plans, et cetera, where based on our particular situation, maybe there's things that we can do. And then for business owners, there's a whole nother batch of things that you can do that a typical employee can't do because you can hire your kids in the business. You can set up tuition reimbursement plans in your business. You can, there's, again, things you can do. You can share equity or bring your students in as partners in some venture where they might share the profits. And you're essentially shifting income from mom and dad to the student in some tax favorable way. And that can be of a benefit. You could buy rental property near the college and have the student manage it if you're a real estate entrepreneur. Lots of strategies. And again, what I tell people is there's hundreds of strategies. It's finding the 5 or 10 that fit your particular situation and then, executing them well. And, again, if you're not into real estate, you probably don't want to do your first venture buying a rental real estate and renting to college kids. You might be in over your head there. I've heard some pretty interesting horror stories on that topic. But for people that understand real estate and, the rental game, it might be a great strategy because it's just one more property on the pile for your business. And then I've seen other situations where, again, they hire the students to clean or run the advertising or all kinds of different things that students can do. And it helps with the taxes. So as a business owner, you have to do everything everybody else does. And then that extra layer of what else can I do because I own a business? So then again, another area to think about. And there's other things that would make college more complicated. If you have a far and wide type of student, if your student is saying, well, I'm going to look at the 3 or 4 colleges here in town or within a short drive, that's easy to go visit those colleges and learn about them. But if you have a student that says, well, I'm interested in schools in California, Texas, East Coast, and maybe here close to home as well. Well, now if you're going all over the country, you've got a bigger project, right? Are we going to visit all the schools all over the country? Are we going to do virtual visits instead? Or in addition, how are we going to put this all together? And it's going to take some effort and some planning and some forethought. I've had families that have twins and triplets. Another example of, okay, now you have to do everything 3 times. You need more time. You need to get this all organized. So I think that's, like I said, there's lots of individual strategies and tactics. And then there's the big picture of, how much are we willing to spend and what's fair and how much is the mom and dad willing to contribute compared to student taking on some debt or student getting summer work, or how is it all, going to work and how are we going to be fair between the kids? If one student goes to the expensive elite school and then the next kid, their good fit school is the local state school. And so when we spent 60 and when we spent 25, was that fair? Some parents would say, yeah, to each their needs. Other parents would say, well, no, we got to balance that somehow. And then again, there's no right or wrong. You just have to figure it out what's going to work for you. Because if you're going to have to write a check for $45,000 to the student that was shorted, so to speak, well, then you need to put that into the budget. That's for most families, that's not easy to do, just out of the general checking, so to speak. So there's lots of that type of thing where, big picture and then into the weeds of, well, if I do this, I'm going to save $1,000 in taxes. If I do it this way, I'm going to, get a little more need-based aid or a little more merit aid or whatever it might be.
I love it. So many different strategies to think about and incorporate with that. I'm curious. Now, I know they take into account the FAFSA, the parents' income, but I haven't looked at the form in quite a while. Is the children's income also included on the FAFSA?
It is.
Okay. Got it. So they're adding it all up anyway with that.
Right. Well, and it's even more than that because the child's income is actually assessed more heavily than parent income. So you don't want to shift income from parents to student if you're in a need-based situation. Now, a lot of times you're not going to get need-based aid, which means now you're shifting it for tax purposes. It doesn't matter, right? That hypothetical $1 million earning parent is not going to get aid no matter what they do. So they need to stop worrying about, if I put this in the student's name, then they're going to count it against me for financial aid. Well, they're already counting the $1 million salary against you and you're already out. So it doesn't matter that the student earned $20,000 or $50,000 from a financial aid standpoint, but it might make a big difference from a tax standpoint or for other reasons. So again, looking at the big picture and understanding how all these pieces interact together is important.
Yeah. So it's a very holistic approach. And, I know for our clients that we work with, a lot of our clients are 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs, and if they're applying profit first, they're easily, in that 37% tax bracket. And so If you're applying one of Brad's strategies with hiring your child or putting in an educational reimbursement type of plan there, that's a 37% savings on a dollar there that you're looking at. So in addition to funding part of the tuition, you're also getting a tax savings from doing that, which is extremely important. So let's talk about some things that you've seen, some common things that for the parent that's kind of just starting out and they're looking to put away money for college. What are some things that we can do to do that, to start thinking about that?
Yeah. Obviously, one of the key areas out there is what's called a 529 plan. Every state operates one or more 529s, and they offer various tax breaks, both federal and state. Now, for a lot of states, it makes sense to use the plan in your state because in order to get, as an example, in order to get Wisconsin's tax benefits, you have to use the Wisconsin plan if you pay Wisconsin taxes. The same with Illinois and Virginia and many states. Now, Texas doesn't have state income tax. So in that situation, they wouldn't matter as much whether you use Texas or a competitor. But so first you want to make sure you use the state that's appropriate for you. Now, sometimes you might still not want to use the state you're in, but you'd have to have a good reason. I think and there's been a lot of changes over the last 15 years. So occasionally I'll have someone come to me and say, well, my advisor 20 years ago said it wasn't good. And it's like, oh, well, 20 years ago, maybe it wasn't good. But that was 20 years ago. Things have changed. Time to update your thinking about what makes sense now. So I guess that's the first thing is, leveraging 529s. But then for many families, you might pair that with some additional savings and investing or, using Roth IRAs or having the students set up their own retirement plans. Or again, when you're shifting them income, now they can contribute to a Roth IRA. There's lots of different strategies they could use. And like I said, it's a matter of, well, what are your goals and what will fit together best, for the colleges you're looking at for your particular financial situation. But I think it's also important that this is something you can do relatively early, right? You can figure out your savings and investing and what's appropriate when you've got a high school freshman or an eighth grader or whatever it might be. What I see a lot is people come to me because they've got a junior and they're trying to figure it all out. And then we realize, well, we can still make things better for the eighth grader, the sixth grader too, because, the college is coming. We just don't know. And sometimes it's like, well, there's things we can do with them that we didn't do with the oldest because we're too late, but we'll do better with the second and the third, which leads me to another point, which is start earlier than you realize. For a lot of families, starting your freshman or sophomore year in high school is not too early to really jump in with both feet. College visits and again, reviewing your saving and investing, understanding how much you're willing to pay, understanding how the different colleges will work for your particular situation. I mentioned earlier that Stanford offers great aid if your income is relatively low. So as a business owner, maybe you can make your income relatively low for a year or two or three while college is happening and take advantage of that. Or maybe you're on the other end, which is, well, our income is high and we're not going to get any need-based aid. Well, Stanford doesn't offer any merit aid. So you're pretty much you're paying full price at Stanford if you don't qualify for need-based aid. Whereas other colleges offer merit aid. So yes, they're both 80. Stanford says you don't need any money, so you're going to pay full price. But some other school might be 80 where they offer merit aid. And they say, well, you got a strong student. And you would have a strong student if they can get accepted to Stanford. So they might qualify for a $30,000 or $40,000 scholarship. Some other school where now their net cost is substantially less. And I've had many families say, well, is it worth it to spend more money? It's like, well, that's a value proposition for most families. And it really matters a lot, again, in my opinion, about, well, where's that money coming from? If you're giving up your lake home so you can spend crazy amounts of money on college, that's one decision. It's a different decision to say, well, we're decimating our retirement in order to pay lots of money on college. So, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, what are the consequences if you spend too much on college? And understanding, because in a lot of cases, there are alternatives. They just may not be as prestigious or they may not be as easy to come by as far as understanding how to do it.
Very good point, because you're right about that. If you have your money in retirement, there's not 100% guarantee that you're going to get it back, right? Because at some point it's hopefully invested in something, and those investments, hopefully will work out for you. Statistically will work out for you, but nothing's guaranteed. But definitely if you're investing in your child's education, things happen, right? The ROI isn't guaranteed, right? They might major in history and not be able to get a job when they get out, and you don't have any control over what they major in. So that is true. You have to think about, how are you going to pay for this? Do you want to use your retirement to do that? Because that retirement eventually can become generational wealth, no matter what break your child decides to do. So definitely that's an important thing to consider with that. And I like, Brad, how you talked about the Roth IRA. I know a lot of our clients see that, they give their child their first job, right? They hire them, the child works in the business. If they're a sole proprietorship, working for mom and dad sole proprietorship, that can be federal tax free. They're making less than a standard deduction. It can be as well as, Social Security, Medicare free, right? If they're working for mom and dad sole proprietorship. I always think about the little restaurant, the little Asian Chinese restaurant with the child taking your cash payment for the buffet, right?
Right.
And, you can put that in a Roth IRA, which is an after tax vehicle, right? And which happen to be zero tax, but they can use that money on college, right? So if they start working for you at 14, they can put that money away to build it up to go to college. And that's a great way to give them work experience, plus have them pay for their own education one day. Now, I don't know if you can force them to pay for their own education with their Roth, but you're definitely going to have to set some standards up that's training as a parent, right? that we have to work on with that, which is very important.
Right. I mean, the reality of it is most parents have a lot of leverage, because in the end, there's going to be a net cost. And it's like, well, we're going to do it this way or I'm not paying. And guess what? Most students will say, okay, I guess we'll do it your way. Because again, if they say, well, no, I want to go off on my own and do it my own way. Well, if they can do it, if they're that type of student and they can do it, well, great. Then they don't need you at all. They can just go do it. But most of the time, especially with the prices of college today, most students, need parent help in some form, whether it's guidance or often it's helping to pay the bills.
Definitely with that. And so, I'm curious, are there anything else that a parent can do to really start saving for that college outside of the employment opportunities and some of the tax strategies?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly it really boils down to budgeting and that type of thing, where it's not unusual for me to work with a family and say, all right, well, based on where we are and what's going on, we need $3,500 a month to make all this college happen. And they look at me a little scared and go, well, that's a big number. And it's like, well, okay, well, then maybe you shouldn't pay for all of college. Maybe you should have them take some loans. There's a basic loan that all students can take. It's $5,500 for a freshman and $6,500 for a sophomore and $7,500 for a junior and senior. So that all told adds up to $27,000. They'd have to pay the interest, they accrue the interest while they're in school. So they might graduate owing $30,000 or $32,000, depending on the interest rate. We don't know exactly, but a payment somewhere in the neighborhood of $300, $325 per month for 10 years once they graduate. Now, again, I don't think that's unreasonable to expect students, and many parents that can afford to pay full freight will say, no, they're going to take that loan. I mean, it's not my job to pay for everything all the time. They can have some skin in the game too. And for some families, you need that. Again, if you have 3 kids and they all do that, well, we're talking, almost $100,000 of that parents don't have to come up with. And it takes the pressure off a little bit. So, and then you can go beyond that and say, well, not only that, but we're going to lend them some of our money, but they're going to pay us back. There's pros and cons to that, right? Where now you're the bank, and if they don't pay, are you willing to foreclose, so to speak? Because I think a lot of, when our kids were 12 or 15 or whenever it was, they would say, hey, Mom, can I borrow $20? And you're like, yeah, sure. And you knew it was gone. You knew you weren't getting it back. And if that's kind of the system they grew up with, when they say, hey, Mom, can I borrow $20,000 for college? What do they mean? I mean, you have to have that discussion now and say, well, this is really a loan. You're really going to have to pay it back. Or maybe it isn't. I don't know. It's up to you. But most students assume, however it's been so far, that's kind of the way it's going to continue. And I think that's another important thing to realize when it comes to education. They think mom and dad have it covered. most of the time, especially in the middle income, upper middle income and up, right? They think mom and dad are just going to take care of it and they don't have to worry about it. Just like, when they were 12 or 14, they said, hey, that iPhone is cool. Next birthday or Christmas, there it was. And then they're 17, 16, 17, and they're like, mom, you wouldn't have to drag me around so much if we had a used car or something, where I could drive. We should just have another car. And you're like, yeah, that sounds great. I am trying to drag him around. So you find a third car or fourth car, and they think that's great. Now, for a college student or a budding high school student, there's not much difference between $1,000 phone, a $10,000 car, and a $100,000 education, right? They're all big numbers. They're all more money than they typically see. They don't understand that, they're just going to shake the money tree like you always do. And just like you came up with the car, you're going to come up with an education. And until you have those discussions with them, they're not going to know any different most of the time. Again, there's that rare student that understands and is a little more, worldly and understands what's going on. But most students are a little bit naive, and rightly so. A lot of times as parents, we're trying to keep them like kids be kids kind of attitude. And we are sheltering them from this, the hard realities. But then if, again, it cuts both ways when it gets into the college planning process.
I love that. Great for setting expectations. If they're used to borrowing 20 and never paying it back, they're going to expect to borrow 40 and not pay it back too. So parents, get ready. It's not like you can't say, don't come to Thanksgiving if you don't have a check. It's going to be what it is with that.
Yes, exactly. One of the hints that or recommendations I've had is if it's a serious loan, then you need to set terms and conditions about when and how you're going to be paid back, and put things in there like you can't buy a new car until you've paid back this loan, or you can't live without a roommate until you've paid back this loan. Again, the typical college graduate is going to say, oh, I'm making good money now. I need to go get an apartment. I need a new car. And they're going to learn how to spend every penny and then go, oh, sorry, mom and dad, I have so many bills, I can't pay you back. And it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't have bought that new car. If someone's going to get a new car after you graduate, it's going to be dad, not you. So, keep that in mind and you have to tell them that, and you're going to have to remind them every year, as you do the finances, and hopefully it'll stick. And even that's no guarantee, but it gives you a much better chance than I told them once it was a loan and they're going to pay me back. It's like, well, they didn't hear it. If you told them once, way back when they were a freshman, that's not realistic for most families again.
No. Now, Brad, I'm curious about your thoughts. There's the 529 plan. There's a Coverdell. And each of them are different, right? Coverdell has an income limit. Do you have a preference of which one is better, 529 or Coverdell? What's your thoughts on that?
529 is almost always the one that people go with. Again, your income you can participate at a 529 at any income level. You can put substantially more money. I think the Coverdell is still limited to $2,000 per year. The one advantage of the Coverdell is it's more like an IRA where you can choose to invest the money how you'd like. So if you wanted to put college money in some unusual investment that's just not available inside of 529, then that would be the route to go. But for the typical parent doing the typical stocks and bonds and that kind of stuff, almost always it's going to be the 529. Not only do you get similar investments either way, but you have much higher limits. You often have state tax benefits in your state where appropriate. So there's, a number of compelling reasons that most people don't bother with the Coverdell anymore. Not to say that it isn't good. Like I said, it's just if you did the Coverdell, most likely you'd also have to do a 529 with it in order to get to to get enough to cover what you're looking to do. Because usually the limits are too low, especially if there's late stage, right? If you've already got a high school sophomore and you're saying, I'm going to save $2,000 a year, well, that's not going to get you where you need to go, most likely.
Right. Oh, yes. Definitely for you got to start them at 6 months old. Then if you're going to do a Coverdell, I think it's a terrible shame that they give that much freedom of choice to people that, don't have, because there's an income limit, right? For a Coverdell. And you would think with the 529, they would give you more flexibility, but I just always laugh at the rules. It's always very interesting from that standpoint.
Right. And to be fair, you have to realize that most of the rules were written by people that don't really understand It was originally the politicians that created the framework and they didn't really understand. And then it was interpreted by somebody. And then they made the next idea. And so that's, college in general is that, right? They invented the idea of financial aid in the 60s and they just kept changing it and modifying it and bolting new programs on and making it different and better. And because of that, there's a lot of weird rules and so forth. And it's like, well, why is it this way? Well, they negotiated sometime in the 70s and one said, why is it 59 and a half? You have access to retirement. Why isn't it 60 or 59? Well, they were probably at one point saying, well, if we make it 59 and a half, we can all agree and we'll sign it. So that's what happened. They negotiated it. One side wanted 59, one side wanted 60. They agreed to 59 and a half. That's why it's 59 and a half. Not a good reason, but that's the way it is. That happens in college all the time where they created this program and then they modified it and then they remodified it. Matter of fact, the FAFSA right now is undergoing dramatic changes. The families that are filling it out shortly would be parents of high school seniors, and they have the all new FAFSA. And we haven't seen it yet. It's coming out in December. So we're kind of waiting to see, but they have redesigned the system. Again, what happened was they created the FAFSA way back when we used to use mail and mail it back and forth. And then they kind of took the paper forms and put them online. Now they finally decided to redesign it from the ground up as an online first process. And then if you need paper forms, they're available, but they encourage most people to, most people are going to do it electronically now. So they've kind of changed how it works, changed the formulas, so for those of you out there that already have kids in college, things are changing. So if you didn't get aid last year, you might this year, or the other way around. You might get aid and you might lose it next year again, or it might change materially or not at all, depending on your situation. But they did change the formulas and how things are counted and that as well.
Right. Yeah. It says, I remember those forms you had to fill out in pencil and like fill out things with circles. That was like way back in the 90s. I don't want to date myself on that, but yeah, it was a a pencil and eraser event every single year. Calling my dad, can you fill it out, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Very big deal. And I know for a lot of our high net worth people, we sometimes talk about sheltering assets and sheltering things in retirement accounts, because those are things that don't necessarily need to be incorporated on the FAFSA too. Brad, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. So for families out there, you can, so it's income and assets of mom and dad and income and assets of the student that are counted when they figure out how much need-based aid you're going to qualify for. Now, again, at some of the higher end schools, it might make a difference, especially at a Stanford or an Ivy League or some of those where they say we're going to meet 100% of need. Well, based on the formulas, if you do this instead of that, you're going to need 3,000 more. Well, if you're going to need 3,000 more, you're going to get 3,000 more. So why wouldn't we do it? And again, it's a holistic planning where, well, if we do this, it costs us 10,000 in taxes, but saves us 3,000 in aid. Well, obviously we wouldn't do that because the costs are higher than what. But sometimes it's good for taxes and it's good for financial aid, and so it's good all around. So let's go ahead and do it. And then sometimes it's good for taxes, and we're not sure about financial aid. Some families where, well, if we end up going to the expensive school and we don't get a lot of merit aid, then we'll qualify for need-based aid. But if we get a merit award, then maybe the need is going to go away. So, but doing all this shuffling isn't going to hurt us. It could help us. Well, let's do it. But I think that's always the process where for most families, it's what can I do? Should I do it? Because on the flip side, I've seen a lot of people, again, say things like, well, they're going to count this, I've got, $10,000 in the bank in my student's name and they're going to count it against us. And it's like, yes, they are. But again, they're also counting that $1 million salary against you. And just that alone disqualifies you from any aid. So whether the student has 10,000, 100,000 or zero does not going to make a difference. You can stop worrying about that. Now focus on what you can change that will help. Tax planning, merit aid, those types of things. So I think that's kind of that two sides of that coin. Yes, planning for need-based aid is a great strategy, but it has its limits for, again, for people that aren't going to get need-based aid no matter what they do. Well, they shouldn't waste their time planning for need-based aid. And If you're going to like the local state school, a lot of times they will do what's called gapping, right? You say, well, based on my current situation, I need $10,000. If I do planning, I'll need 15,000. Well, guess what? The state doesn't have the 10 and they don't have the 15 either. They're going to give you the $5,500 loan either way. So yes, you do need more and they will acknowledge you need more. But then the college will say, but we don't have it. So the fact that you need more doesn't mean you're going to get more. Whereas at other situations, it does mean exactly that. When you do, there's some new rules around the Pell Grant as an example. If you cross certain lines, you automatically get a maximum Pell Grant or you automatically get a minimum Pell Grant. So if you're close to those lines, well, you probably should do what it takes to be under those lines because it can't hurt to get some free money. Now they're relatively low. So, for a lot of families, you're not going to be able to get anywhere near them, but some families could with some good planning. So another, again, strategy that's great for the people where it fits, not so great for the rest.
I love it. And that's why it's important to work with someone like Brad, right? So that you can make sure that you're getting the right strategy for your individual situation too with that. And definitely it's never too early to start planning and sitting down with someone because, the earlier you start and to get that expertise, right? It's going to allow you to not just build, but to save as you build, and taxes and other things too, which is really, really important from that perspective. Now, Brad, one of the questions we love to ask is you drop so many juicy morsels. Okay. So many juicy morsels. That we love, a question that we love to ask our guests is if you could leave our viewers and our listeners with one piece of advice, what would that advice be?
Understand that college planning is a process. Right. You don't sit down on one Sunday afternoon and say, all right, we're going to knock it out today. We're building our college plan. You're going to sit down on many Sunday afternoons and say, all right, this is where we are. What do we do next? Should we visit schools? Do we have to work on our testing? What about scholarships? And then you'll go do some things. And then based on what you do, you might come back and say, oh, well, we just visited those expensive privates. Our students didn't like them. So now we have to reconfigure and say, well, let's look at some state schools. Maybe that's what they'll like. Or we just realized we're not going to get any need-based aid at these schools. So let's talk about merit aid or the other way around, right? So as you work through the process, it's kind of an evolving thing. It's not, again, a lot of people say, well, just give me the plan and then I'll go execute it and we'll be done. It's like, well, most of the time it's kind of steps. So if you start, you're very green, you haven't visited colleges, your student doesn't know much about what they want or what they're looking for. You do some visits, you do some planning, you learn about need-based aid and merit aid. You take that information and you build the school list and you visit some schools and you take that information, you build different school lists and then you visit different schools. And then based on that, you look at your test scores and, maybe it's test optional, maybe it isn't. And there's all this evolution. It's a learning process and an execution of various tasks. So kind of setting that expectation, and it can start early. It can start freshman, sophomore year of high school, should start freshman and sophomore year of high school, especially if you're a business owner, blended families, again, far and wide kids, all those things we talked about that make it more complex. The more of those things you have, the earlier you need to start. And I guess the last idea around that is there's things parents do by themselves, the need-based aid, the saving and investing. There's things that the students do by themselves. Hopefully they pick their career by themselves, right? It's their decision, not mom and dad's decision.
They just have to have ROI, that's all.
Exactly. And then, they have to write the essays and do the applications. And then there's the stuff you do together, right? Visits and planning and all that kind of stuff. So mom and dad can do some of the things, even if the student isn't ready. So you have a freshman that has no idea what's going on with college yet. They're just a freshman in high school. Parents can do some things around need-based aid, merit aid, even though their student's not ready. And then once the student's ready, then you go to the next step of visits and all the other pieces.
I love it.
Yeah. So it's like I said, it's a process that families need to plan early, plan often, and just assume it's going to take some time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, Brad, for our viewers and listeners that do want to learn more, that do want to connect with you to start that college planning or really optimize what they're doing to plan for college, what's the best way for them to reach out to you to learn more?
Right. So all my information is at the website, tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. So we've got a podcast and a newsletter and lots of free resources. And also a phone number's there. You can click, schedule an introductory appointment there. Reach out to us, however, whatever makes sense for you. Send us an email, whatever. So everything is there. And a lot of families just jumping into some of the podcasts or looking at the cost of colleges or, some of the key resources. We've got a great thing around, it's called the College Money Report, where you can put in your statistics, your finances, and your academic profile of your student and some of the colleges you might be interested in. And it'll give you some preliminary pricing about what kind of need-based aid you might expect, what kind of merit aid you might expect, and an approximate net price. And again, it's not perfect, but it's the best we have so far. But it kind of gives you an idea of what to expect based on your exact situation, instead of looking at averages that may or may not apply to you.
Thank you, Brad, for sharing. You have definitely provided us with a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you for having me.